Welcome to Land Language, the podcast transforming landscapes from toxic to regenerative. We're your hosts, Britt from Blueprint Earth,
and co-host Bethany from Bethany Ridmark Landscapes.
We explore beautiful, functional design through conversations with scientists, vendors, contractors, and designers who are changing the industry.
Whether you're in the field or at the drafting table, join us as we explore regenerative practices that care for people, place, and planet.
Let's dig in. Okay, something really cool happened. We were talking earlier about how much feedback we've gotten on this, and I don't think I was ready for all of that excitement.
Sweet notes that were showing up. People were so kind. Instagram comments, emails. Mm-hmm. It's so fun to find people that care about the same sorts of things and are excited to hear more in the world.
There's this gal, Julie, that showed up at the Portland Home and Garden Show when I spoke, and she came because she had listened to our podcast. I know. And I was really honored because I was like, you've not met these people, and then all of a sudden you've impacted their lives in a way that they feel inspired and they show up for you. Humans are cool.
So yes. I will forever be appreciative of the magic of the internet to connect us with each other.
Right. We're to start with some deck design in terms of materialism and in terms of how to kind of thread the conversation with the client so that you can get to the end result in a very successful way. I have a lot of theory on that, but I'm interested to also hear yours. So I'm going to let you start, and I'll throw it in.
So a client comes and is interested in a deck design. I think ultimately before you ever even get to shapes on a page or hand waving on the site, what is the motivation? What are you doing? What are you making this space for? Mm-hmm. Are you expanding your house footprint so you have another place to be because it's tight quarters inside? Are you making a celebration space? Are you just connecting with the outdoors in a way where you don't have to step on wet plants to go outside? Mm-hmm. Why are you doing it? What is its ultimate purpose? My thinking is that good things take the investment of resource and intentionality, and to get through that process and to stomach the cost and to stomach the time that it takes to do a wonderful job, you have to really be committed to your why and the real value that you know that you're going to get at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a permanent, it's something we should build to be permanent, which means great design is really where it starts in answering that question. In my practice, I think about the landscape in terms of Lego blocks a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So I think of the furniture being what starts to shape things. And so as you're talking about celebration, I'm okay, is that an 8-person or a 12-person party that or is this a 60-person party that we're planning for 2 times a year because you just love to have that wedding celebration and that baby shower, which is so real for some families, and I love that. Mm-hmm. So it starts to be both what's the permanent furniture and then what's the sometimes furniture potentially. And I think it's really, really important to remember who the people are. We had a really beautiful conversation with an architect yesterday at this project for 2 cardiologists, and they don't have kids, but they have these 60 people parties. Mm-hmm. And the architect said something that was so beautiful to me. She said, we need to make space that's just for the 2 of them, so that it doesn't feel lonely.
Yes.
But also so that there's a moment that's just made for them that is a big moment that honors what they've created. And I was like, yes. So beautiful. And so we looked at this edge of the cliff where, we talked about putting in a fire pit, and we looked at the edge of the cliff, and we were thinking about building a deck. The materialism of it's a deck or if it's a concrete or flagstone slab was yet to be determined. But we looked at the moment where they look up and down the Columbia River Gorge, and they're high up, and they look at Hood. And that moment feels like something you should want to bring everyone to. Mm-hmm. But actually that moment, specializing it for just 2 really important chairs and the fire and the view. And the other furniture will come out, but it's going to be movable. It's going to be the stuff that gets packed away in the garage. And the everyday experience of that is going to be just for them. I love that. Mm. So when we get into really good design, you have the opportunity to make things worth investing in when you've been really thoughtful. And one of the ways that we plan decks, and I talk with clients around deck design and deck construction, is because we've designed it well, let's make sure that we don't have to rebuild it in 15 years.
Mm-hmm. I don't have any Personally, I don't have any experience with the aluminum framing yet on a project that I've worked on, but I'm fascinated by the concept because I love the notion that you're building something meant to last. Like how many times have I shown up on, maybe it's a piece of property that someone's built and so they're excited, or I'm sorry, someone's purchased and they're excited to change it. And you see an old decrepit deck that's falling apart that was built poorly to begin with and it's a mess and now it's a liability. And okay, fine, you have an opportunity to make something better. What do you really want to think about for long-term stability?
Yeah. I mean, it's about two things. There's like appropriate use case and then there's like permanence. So appropriate use case, I feel like for my mindset is where decks are really shady. So like north sides of house. Our deck at our house is tiny by design and it's between the forest in our house, so it never gets sun. So there's this like expectation that it's going to actually deteriorate faster. And so that to me is like a very clear appropriate use case because the ROI on building with aluminum is big because you're not rebuilding it in 15 years. You're looking at it lasting forever. And that's where we get into like the carbon footprint of kind of what you're putting on top as well. So the material that we chose, which I don't know if I would choose again because this podcast has me like really like reflecting on like, wow, what decisions were good ones and what ones weren't.
That's the beauty of the podcast. That's why we're here to think and wonder.
Yeah. And I don't know the answer to this. So maybe I would, or maybe I wouldn't make the same decision. But the question I have about the materialism is the carbon footprint of it. So we chose decorators in Sedona color, which like is cute. It matches our oak floors, from our home. It feels nice for a composite material. And I knew I wouldn't have to refinish it. I knew I wouldn't have to replace it. I knew that I built that deck one time and that it will live with the house unless somebody decides to rip out the landscape long after we're gone. So that was a permanence decision. If I would have spent like $3,000 less, maybe even less than that, I would have ended up with a pressure-treated wood frame, which would rot. I would put some sort of wood material on it, and then I'd have to refinish it all the time. And it would be slippery because it's on the north side of the home. It would have moss grow on it, which any material does. But I would want to power wash it once or twice a year, which would mean I would need to refinish it all the time. And so these are all like mindset questions. It's like not just like what is the money today, but what is the like experience?
What's the human relationship requirement with this built object? What are you responsible for doing with it and for it in order for it to be useful to you still and to be in good condition? I think this is just me getting ready to go on one of my diatribes, right? But I think we struggle to have accountability with the things that we bring into our lives. We want them to serve us, but we don't want to take care of them. And it's easy to be tempted to just spend the money, buy the thing, set it and forget it. And yet the question in my mind is like, what's the ultimate cost of that? Sometimes it's the cost for an environmental footprint that doesn't feel actually honoring to the earth. Sometimes it's the cost of just a soulless product. How many things I get really bent out of shape about faux this, faux that just has no spirit to it. There's no soul. You can walk into a space, interior or exterior. You can walk into places and feel whether they feel alive with real essence of what they are. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying?
I absolutely do.
Something good and something worth maintaining. There's always maintenance. Otherwise, what soul is in it? So I know it's easy for me as an idealist to say like, I don't know. Yes, it's hard work to go and clean a deck. Do I want to go clean a deck? No. Do I have a deck? No. I have, like I'm on grade. My little patio, I step right outside and I don't have that. I say that actually now that I'm reflecting honestly. We do have a very tiny little wood platform deck right outside of my backyard studio that my husband built a few years ago, and we've stained it. But of course, it needs maintenance. It's starting to look kind of crappy. It needs a little refinishing, and it haunts me when I step on it and think about it because, there's a project. But you know what? It's in my garden. I love it. It's serving its purpose. It's showing some age just like I'm showing my age. We figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I were to channel my inner Lynn Morgan, oh gosh.
I just saw her yesterday and gave her a big hug. I love Lynn.
Gosh, that human. If I were to channel my inner Lynn Morgan, I would design a deck that was extruded aluminum framing and Juniper decking. And that's where I see the most complete answer. for Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. And so that has an aesthetic. Juniper's a bit naughty. You don't get clear juniper. It's a bit yellow, but it takes stain well. And it stops us from just the cedar logging. I mean, it's so hard to drive through. And it brings back habitat for the birds in Eastern Oregon. And the rivers start to fill up again, or the creeks start to fill up again. I mean, come on. I want all of that, you know? So that's where I would go. Maintaining a deck is something I would happily live with, to know that I was bringing back bird habitat. And like I said, I don't think I would have made the same decision. I would have decided to maintain it. I think in that too, in terms of design, I would choose what's necessary to build a deck. A lot of times what we notice, especially when we get into urban design projects, is that people don't actually want to be on the deck because they're on display to their neighbors. And so they feel like they want this thing because their interior finish elevation is 3 feet high. And so therefore they want to go from their kitchen outside and like be in a room that's on the same elevation, but they don't realize that once they spend, $20,000 to build that room, they don't want to hang out there because their like neighbors are looking at them. And then they have the next problem. Like, how do I create hedges? How do I wall off? How do I put bamboo here, or an arborvitae hedge, or, hopefully it's a Pacific wax myrtle hedge, right? And not a laurel, but you start to create enclosure. And so a lot of times when we get to a home and we're starting to design it, that's like the first thing I'm looking at when I'm designing a deck. I'm like, okay, what is this going to actually feel like? So usually the answer in an urban environment is, let's use it as a staircase. Let's give you that 3-foot landing, so you've got a safe space to turn around, and then let's get you down, and then let's get you in the garden and cocooned.
Yeah, get the connection back. That's my instinct as well. Get out and get down and get onto the land and on a patio or on a space that feels like it's connected with the earth. And maybe that's just me and my own desire to be rooted to the soil, because I like to be standing on solid surface. To be candid, when I drive around the West Hills and see homes built on incredible stilts and things, out over the top, I've just internally, my own physical being, I don't know if I could sleep at night if I was hovering. I know some people can. We all have our different inclinations for the space we like to be on, but I think that's probably another one of those reasons where, being in a deck above versus using it as a transition down and being in your garden just feels more secure and stable to me personally. That's completely subjective Bethany talk.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like grounding. It's interesting that you bring that up, because that we get asked for. Literally, we have a client who's just an amazing human named Lynn, and she, the first requirement she came at us with was I need to be able to walk outside to do my lymphatic drainage, right? To bounce on my what do you call those things? Those little bounce on my little trampoline. There's a name for it, and then step off, and put my feet on the ground. And I don't want to touch concrete. I want to touch an earthen material between my interior space and the ground.
Yeah,
you're like, yes,
I love it.
I like to think of clients also wanting to do good, and I know they do, especially when they show up to practices like yours and mine. They have an ethos that they're in line with, and you're like, let's go.
Yeah.
And when I share this simple fact that a lawn has a root depth of 4 to 6 inches, which means underneath that is likely compacted clay soil, which means there's no infiltration, minimal infiltration. And a meadow has feet of root depth. It sequesters more carbon. It provides pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat. When you start to explain about the soil, our microbiome in our body, and how when you have deeper root depths, you end up enhancing that microbiome, and you enhance water infiltration, and you enhance stormwater management. And then, of course, the benefit to the birds and the bees and the butterflies, and your morning coffee experience of watching them, they start to get it.
Yeah, when your garden is alive, you've nurtured so many other layers of life in the soil, in the plants, in the wildlife around you, and then in yourself as you're connected to it.
Yeah, and that's what's up. I mean, people want to be sold the end result. They want to know what the transformation is, right? And that's that's really important because it is a massive investment to do a landscape construction project. You know, I don't know one that's been under $70,000 in the last year, or few, you know, and it's really hard to do big renovation projects for really under $200,000. So people want to make sure that at the end of that project that they're going to have a renewed sense of life. And that means they're taking care of themselves. That means that they have space to watch their children play, and their children have connection to the land. They have reasons to hop off iPads. Yeah. They have reasons to stop scrolling in their own mindset, because people really don't want to sit around and scroll all day. They just do it because they don't know what else to do, right? It's like our boredom fix. And so when we root people into the transformation of what we're bringing them, it's really powerful to know why you're bringing them what you are. And we hope this podcast is the tool to get you to know why you're bringing what you're bringing, and empower you to like really understand lawns over meadows, juniper over cedar.
And my mind just keeps going back to like a magnet to last year. This was an opportunity to remove a front yard, to remove the old lawn, to remove a number of the existing shrubs and kind of traditional old garden bones that were there. Although we did leave the perimeter hedging, loose, informal hedging. It was a lot of old rhodies and pieris and, you know, typical Portland shrubs, but that was around the perimeter between the home and the road. But within that zone, leaving a couple of strategic trees and a couple of strategic shrubs, we got to rework the entire front yard and build out this incredible, mostly native garden, but with a lot of sprinkled in moments of non-natives that helped either hold the space or define some of the rooms that we created, and then put in rainwater and stormwater facilities that double as kids' splash zone and play zone. And I think I shared this one with you, Britt. You know, there's such a fun little bit we connected, a sweet little brass faucet in there that has an auto shut so that the kids can go and just turn it on, play in the water. And guess what? It closes automatically. And you don't have to worry, mom and dad, that you're dumping your irrigation water too far. And a little amphitheater. And we had wonderful local Willow weaver named Rose come out, and she built this incredible children's play structure out of Willow. Again, just inviting the children of the family to come and be outside. This whole project was meant as an invitation for the family to get out of the house and into the space that is, you know, it is kind of facing the neighborhood. There's enough privacy that they're not completely exposed, but we also intentionally left this kind of corridor view in from the street where you do get a glimpse to see that it's not your traditional Portland yard. It is a little bit of a, hey, here's an example of a really fun alternative way to make a front feel wonderful. And the existing, we left the existing pathway up to the door, and we left, like I said, some of the key trees and plants that were doing a great job, but otherwise transforming what was below and bringing back now so much increased soil health, so much more habitat for creatures. It was really fun, even as part of the project, to provide a directory of all of the kind of anticipated wildlife that we would expect to see in this type of a garden, and kind of whet their appetites for, look at what you get to have an eye out. And I almost want to give the kids like a little magnifying glass and, you know, check mark field hunter's guide to identify species. You know, as we go forward, these are the types of things that are so fun to be able to foster that kind of connection with a living landscape. And all along the way, the decisions about materials were really run through the same kind of conversation that we've been having together about what do we really want to use? What do we really want to see lasting in the ground as part of this? The builder, we had proposed a chalkboard on one of the fences underneath, in fact, an old laurel that had been left to grow wild. And it looks like you would think it's a tree. You walk up and it has this massive trunk and these towering branches. And guess what? It's just an old laurel. But again, we're not going to take it out. It's serving a purpose. And it became the corner of the yard where it was the children's kind of fort area, and along the fence line there, we were going to put a chalkboard, and the builder ended up finding this incredible old piece of slate from an ancient schoolhouse, I think up in Washington. I can't remember now the specific town that it came from, but those ended up getting, you know, mounted to the walls and framed in, and so it's, you know, that's incredible. We ended up getting, I believe, redwood that had been harvested all from a single tree that had been felled and kept in someone's yard, and like a materials yard. And then they made contact and were able to take this and create all of our different pieces for our kind of balance curbing beams, our little stumpery, I don't know, all sorts of pieces that just came together. And it feels like the materials all have these stories. They all have these origins that came from a place or came from a different season of an experience that now are woven together into this brand new garden. And they're solid, they're built well, they're quality materials. It's beautiful stone pathways and lovely fountain, not even a fountain, but a reflecting bowl with water, and a little spot for mom to come and have her coffee and be near enough to where the kids are hopefully running around and exploring and playing, and she'll have this moment of sunshine in the front yard. And all of that is so gratifying as a designer to put all this on paper, see the ideas, understand what we're going for, and then watch it get built with such care. And now it'll hopefully the last little bit of seeding this spring and have the eco lawn come into its own and see the kids out there on the green patch surrounded by all these wonderful plants. I can't wait.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I want to hang out there.
I know. I want to have a party in their front yard, but I'll wish the children well. Hopefully they have many tea parties in their willow hut.
Oh my gosh. Hearing you talk about that makes me so excited, and also makes me wonder how you think about planning for the not little kid. Like in my season of life, I have a 2 and a 7-year-old, mm-hmm. right? And in your season of life, you have teenagers now.
Not quite, thank
Not
goodness,
quite?
but
Okay.
soon 10 and 12.
10 and 12, okay.
It's coming.
So you've got, older kids that maybe aren't as excited about the willow hut and the splash pad, right? Even though like they'll probably find use for them continuing because they're just really cool. Like I would hang out in them and, play. Yeah. But how do you think about designing for like, as your girls go into their teenage years, like how do you think about designing space for them, and like what feels important
mm-hmm.
to get them outside?
Yeah, that's
and off of Instagram or whatever other children might be doing.
That's a good question. I think the spaces that are the nooks and crannies and the getaways, right? Like if you have a place that's within walking distance from your own door, but it feels apart and separate, it seems like as you're growing up and you want a little bit more space and you want to be maybe a little bit out of sight, mm-hmm. Creating those spots, whether that's for, ideally, if I was a teenager, or as I remember being a teenager, I just wanted to go out into the woods, and I never actually hung a hammock, but I would have loved, just a place to go and relax and be. One comment on the project that I was just referencing, though, the backyard already has all sorts of amazing places for their children to age into. So I'll be curious to see, I think, over time, as the elements like the willow fort and such are not necessarily the key factors anymore, those might morph and change or just grow and become these little garden follies from memories past of childhood, and then the garden itself and the habitat support will become just the beautiful scene to be looking at. And I think the little coffee moment will be used by mom and anybody else that wants to step out and mm-hmm. be in those spaces. But yeah, I think, for older children and just for family members that want to be spread out and find places to go and be a little bit tucked away, a little bit alone, or have a place for decompressing, right? Like we live in a small house in a fairly small yard, but it's really nice to just step outside and go on a little walk. It's not going to be that far, but it's just a little bit of distance.
I think what that says is like respecting their space and their freedom mm-hmm. within a safe container. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, because I'm not like, my 2-year-old's attached to me. I'm like surprised that she's not like running around while we're right here as our guest. And so it makes me think about like even larger projects, and when mm-hmm. we work on like vineyard scale or like hotel scale of making those spaces for different types of people, mm-hmm. People who are more introverted or neurodivergent or sensory overload, mm-hmm. and people who really like to have private conversations. Yeah. Or maybe only like willing to be in a group of 100, but really want to only be with like 3 people there. So they're kind of pressing their boundaries of being in large communal spaces. And it makes me think about how important it is to create those zones in even like large landscapes mm-hmm. where people can find some privacy. And, when I designed the Society Hotel in the Gorge for a prior firm that I worked with, like the thing that I thought of in the yoga dome was like how that was hidden. And mm-hmm. like, I think a lot of people don't even know that actually
exists.
You
have to go on this little journey to find it.
Back. Yeah. And like, we like strategically like place boulders in front of it so that like, first off, you don't know it's there. And second, like there's like a moment to like sit and pause, and you just don't go into the earth in yoga dome, but like you have kind of this quietness. Oh, secret tip that nobody might know. Actually, I don't know if I've shared this
Tell
before,
me.
but like if you actually climb up on top of it, if you are so bold, there's a seating space up there.
Is there really?
Yeah.
I've been there so many times and I've never been up to the seating space on the top of the dome.
Yeah.
Okay. Note to self. Thank you.
Yeah. And so it's like, there wasn't a lot of opportunity because it's like so much of the space is just pathways and buildings
Right.
to like create these like micro moments, but like finding those moments. And it makes me wish that I would have created more of them in that project. But really making sure that you kind of serve everyone's mental desires for being in public feels really important too, as well as teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me think back when I first started working after college. I was at Quatrefoil, and my boss, Brian Bainson, had been really instrumental in the Portland Memory Garden, which is, of course, specifically built for folks with Alzheimer's and their families and caretakers. And it's a beautiful garden that has like, I believe one entrance and exit, and the gate is there, and it's contained, and it has this lovely looping path with all of these opportunities to kind of sit off to the side. And again, even as a young 20-something just coming into the firm and just trying to learn about landscape architecture and in the real world, and seeing the impact of places like that created safety and security and a place for family members and caretakers and folks in that stage of life feeling like they could exhale and be in nature and be safe. And I think that applies to being parents of young children with the same sort of needs for containment, but also encouraging wonder and exploration. And I don't think we're going to have any success putting our teens in a garden with a gate, but giving them places, again, like you said, that are safe with enough distance that they can start to do that kind of separation and exploration, decompression, communing with nature on their own terms, a little bit of distance. So they're all important things as we think about making them semi-artificially in the ways that we get to design, right? But in nature, of course, if you were depending on the landscape of your home territory, you would naturally grow through your stages of life and find the places and be in the places that were safe and soothing for whatever you're going through, and whether that's caretakers of young ones, near the waterways or near the cliffs or near the edges where you're really on high alert, or bringing them into the places that are more like the valleys, the nurturing kind of safe and closed spots, right? I think we're like, this is all part of being a human and being in the terrain around us and learning how to navigate that. So what do those lessons teach us about making the spaces that we're living in day to day, or that we're sharing in public parks or schoolyards, or places that are more suited for our neighborhood or city scale? But what a privilege to get to think through those and try to emulate what we can find in the natural world and make these places that knit us together with just enough danger and challenge to teach us what it means to be human and alive in the world, and then enough safety to be secure and to have those moments of being, the age-old lesson of prospect and refuge, that feeling of having something has your back, you're fine, you're safe and secluded, you know where you are, and you have this beautiful view of what's in front of you, and you know your place in the world because of that.
It makes me think of like how much responsibility we have as designers to take notice of like an entire family or a community's points of reference in life. And it might be a new thing. So they might not know what it's like to have a sauna and a cold plunge and an outdoor shower. And like, they're like, but I really want hot, cold therapy. Right. And so how do you curate that space for that kind of person? How does dad decompress? Does he like want to go out and chop some wood? Or does he like want to hop in the hot tub? Or does he really love to grill? And that's like his jam, And where does mom sit when there hasn't been a space created for her, because she finds that spot and she sits there, but there's nothing there. She just pulls out a blanket and sits there, right? But that's where her like reading nook is going. And I think these kinds of mindset questions as you're going into it is just like pulling people out of themselves. It's like a bit of like therapy when you kind of start with a client. You're like, tell me about the best version of you and how you love yourself.
Yeah.
And how do you want to love yourself even more? Because let's go.
I'm smiling because I'm remembering clients of my own over the years that have either known themselves well enough that when they come to me, they already have this desire and wish list, or we've had a chance to, unearth it. I'm thinking of one particular client, Jill, who's just a gem. And I remember her dream of her reading nook in her garden. When you said reading nook, that's where my mind just jumped back to. And I remember how straightforward it was to design it and put it in this corner and then to come back. And over the years, I've visited her many times, and, she has her furnishings out there, and it's beautiful. It's just a far enough away from the house walk to let the world go behind her. And I know she thrives in that corner of the garden. And it's such a gratifying thing to know. I mean, she already knew what she wanted. In her heart of hearts, she knew what she wanted, and what a privilege to get to be, designer and introduce her to great contractors and have the project unfold. And now she has this beautiful space that she lives in, and it's so nourishing.
That's the juicy reason we do this for humans. I mean, I always like say, if you ask, well, I always say, like, I'm really not here for the humans. I'm really here for the trees, for wildlife. The experience that people have when they receive like an ecological or regenerative design garden is beautiful. And it makes me turn towards humans and go, this is working, and we need more of this. Because what happens is people find their connection back to themselves, and they find their connection back to nature. And they do that through moments like, I watched the chickadees sit on my Salvia eleganosa and eat the seeds. And 3 weeks earlier, I saw big bumblebees. And you're like, yes, you did, and then they're like, wow, what happens is like, we have these little tiny animals, and they come in and they like kick up all the seeds, and then I get this plant over here. And then, and they become engaged with like the movement and the evolution of what the garden is doing with the support of wildlife. And they get the moments of like reflection where they take a pause in their day and they look outside and they see something that brings them joy and heart. And they see that reflection of life outside of the human experience. And to me, that is the jam. That is why. And when we find our connection back to nature, we find our connection back to ourselves, in my experience.
Yeah. Preach. Yeah. I think, time will tell with any of our efforts. You don't get overnight understanding of what your actions are going to turn into. But when you're planting all of these types of seeds, whether it's seeds of conversation or seeds of design and construction or seeds of just being the channel for those like imaginings of a better version of the world. Like we do all of these things out of the effort to see over time health and improvements and vitality in ways that we aren't experiencing them right now. And so we have the bumpy, you're like, well, nobody taught us, or this little piece of wisdom didn't come down in the lineage that it previously had. We didn't get quite that same communication and infusion of that deep human wisdom of relationship. But you know what? That's okay. We're going to learn from each other. We're going to relearn. We're going to find the sources where those have been kept alive. And even though we don't have all the answers immediately or have all the case studies immediately or all that, whatever, it's okay. That's the beauty of being open to learning from each other and growing. So that's where I'm jazzed, whether the conversations from the podcast or the projects we're building in the ground, whether they turn out exactly as we envisioned or something slightly different, whatever, we're going to learn from them. And all of these ingredients feel really exciting. I mean, I always leave these conversations feeling proud of the industry and of the awarenesses that folks are like tending and caring and holding on to and bringing forward. Let's see what we do with it.
I love that permission you just gave.
Sprinkle that little garden fairy dust around. What do we do?
Yeah.